This conference will now be recorded.
Great, thanks, Eddie. So this month we have a webinar presentation on the deployment of 5G technology on military bases. And before I go again introduce our speakers, just please keep yourselves on mute. And if you have any questions, type it into the chat box. We're going to moderate it through that. Don't hesitate to wait to the end. If you have something that comes up in one of the slides, please just, again, go ahead and type that in, and we'll have our speakers moderate it, and I can help as well. So with our first speaker, we have Marshall, who is a wireless infrastructure consultant with KCI Technologies. He's got a communications career spanning over 30 years and is a well-recognized professional with extensive experience also in real estate, zoning, construction, and legislative experience. Since joining KCI in 2017, Marshall has, strived to be a bridge between the private wireless entities and the government sector to facilitate collaborative efforts for the placement of wireless devices in public spaces. And then we also have James Hiddlebrand. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but he began his telecom career in 1994. His first job was with the wireless industry at Sears in North Carolina. James has had a long career, great with all these wireless technologies, pairs well with Marshall for this presentation. Jim's goal is for him and his team to enhance the mission, ability, and quality of life for each person serving our great nation. So, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to add anything else to your introduction, or if you want to get started with your presentation, but the floor is yours.
Great, Nick. I greatly appreciate the introduction. This is Marshall Pearsall. I'm going to lead off on the presentation today, and I just want to thank everybody on Jim and my behalf to have this opportunity to talk to this group about the wireless industry, 5G, and deployments on military bases. We want this to be an interactive discussion, so if anybody has any questions, just please indicate that you have a question, and we'll try to respond as we're going through the presentation. So with that, next slide, please. I want to start off with giving an overview of wireless networks. This diagram or graphic provides a visualization of the propagation of a wireless signal. And historically, the wireless industry for the past 30 some years has depended upon what they call a macro network. And the macro networks are basically antenna sites that have been deployed on large towers, rooftops, and water tanks for mobile-to-mobile communications. Currently, there are about 400,000 macro sites in the United States today. These macro networks provide the ubiquitous coverage that we've all become accustomed to, so that you can use your phone wherever you may travel. What's nice about these macro networks, most of the sites have emergency communications capabilities. They have battery backup, emergency generators. So they have the capabilities to survive catastrophic events and provide that emergency communications that's needed for our communities. The problem with the macro network is they're running out of capacity. And about 8 to 10 years ago, the industry started thinking about how to solve this problem. And starting in 2016, the industry started deploying what's called a small cell. And the small cell provides that under coverage, precision coverage underneath the ubiquitous coverage that's being provided by the macro tower. And it is just like the name says, the small cells are smaller installations. They have small antennas, small equipment cabinets, and they can be mounted on utility poles and street lights throughout our communities. The wireless industry has targeted public rights of way for these types of installations because they have similar type of infrastructure that's located there, and it's closer to the targeted customer. Their businesses, your pedestrian traffic and vehicular traffic that's adjacent to the public rights of way. The FCC and state legislations have also facilitated the success of small cells within the public rights of way through legislation and different regulations. So it's become very attractive for the wireless industry to look towards right away for these small cells. It's projected that by 2026, there'll be over 800,000 of these installations throughout our communities. They're great concepts. It's a smaller installation, less visual impact to our communities. They can provide surgical precision capacity offloads. They can target areas of high traffic. But the problem with them is that they are not hardened. Most of the installations do not have battery backups nor emergency generators. So if the power grid goes down, you lose the small cell. Additionally, these small cells will be supporting the newer technologies that we'll discuss later today, 5G and such, that are going to be needed for the autonomous vehicles and Internet of Things. Next slide, please. These are examples of macro towers. On your left is a traditional, what they call a self-support tower. The cellular antennas are mounted at the top. The round devices that are mounted underneath it are microwave dishes that are used to provide connectivity to different networks. The middle photograph is of what the industry calls a monopole. Once again, the antennas are mounted at the top of the monopole. These structures are large. They can range from 80 feet all the way up to 250 feet. And the photograph on your right is of a small cell installation. This is on a freestanding pole. The antennas located at the top and the equipment cabinets located below. Per the definition of the FCC, these small cell installations cannot exceed 50 feet in height. So next slide, please. Okay, wireless infrastructure. These four key elements that are listed on this slide, no wireless location can exist without them. You have to have connectivity. You need to have power, commercial power. Of course, they've got the equipment that's required to drive the antennas and the antenna themselves. And fiber is just one option for connectivity. Like I showed you in the earlier photograph, microwave is a consideration for some carriers where fiber is not available, but fiber is the gold standard for the industry. Fiber is the foundation on which the wireless industry is built, and without fiber, the wireless industry would not exist. So you'll see, large amounts of fiber installations taking place within our communities. And those installations not only benefit the wireless industry, but they're going to benefit broadband connectivity for businesses and residences. The challenge is that how do you coordinate all of these elements into one site? The wireless industry may select a location that's perfect for propagation for the signal through the antennas, but the dilemma is, how do you get the fiber to that location? How do you get the commercial power? So this is an obstacle that the wireless industry continually faces. It's a challenge, and it's an opportunity for the wireless industry to support that, or the engineering industry to support that. Next slide, please. So 5G, what is all the excitement about? 5G is just the next evolution of wireless technologies. It is, in its basic form, it's just the protocol for the operation. But what's unique about 5G is how that radio operates. 5G is going to provide lightning fast speeds, low latency, and huge capacity. And these are characteristics that are going to be required to support autonomous vehicles and robotics and the Internet of Things. Future technologies that we can't even begin to comprehend. These characteristics are perfect to support those initiatives. Next slide, please. So frequencies. Historically, the wireless industry has depended upon lower frequencies to provide or propagate signals within our communities. 5G is actually, they're looking at multiple frequencies to deploy this technology. Initially, the industry looked at the higher frequency, the millimeter wave. This was the greatest hope for the wireless industry for new technologies. The millimeter wave technologies, provide the lightning fast speeds. Small cells are perfect for the delivery of this technology. But the problem is that the millimeter wave is very low power. It's got a very small footprint, and the signal does not provide in-building coverage. So, and last but not least, it's very costly to deploy, just due to the sheer number of sites that are required to get the density in order to provide ubiquitous coverage. So the wireless industry is really struggling with this technology. They're deploying it, but they've encountered a lot of obstacles. Now the carriers are looking at other frequencies in low band and mid band specifically. What's attractive about these lower frequencies is they have larger footprint, and they have the ability to provide in-building coverage that the millimeter wave technologies did not. Another thing that's very attractive about the lower bands, they can be integrated into the existing macro cell locations or the tower locations. So they can utilize the existing facilities. You already have fiber, you already have the structure. You just need to add antennas and equipment. It's very easy. The problem with the technology is that they're slower speeds, and the latency is not what can be achieved with the millimeter wave technology. So it has some great benefits, but it's problematic in its own set. So next slide, please. This is a great graphic that shows where the different spectrums lie on the spectrum chart. As I mentioned earlier, the cellular industry, the mobile-to-mobile communications industry existed in a very precise band in the low band. It ranged from about 600 megahertz up to about 2.5 gigahertz. And this, frequency supported what people call the cellular and the PCS spectrums. Now the industry is looking towards the mid band, which there's been a lot of advertisements about the FCC auctioning off what's called the C-band licenses, and there again, these frequencies running from about 4 gigahertz up to 8 gigahertz. But I think there's a lot of interest in obtaining these frequencies to support 5G. I think there's great promise. And then over to the far right is as you can see, millimeter wave technologies is way far from the traditional spectrum that has been used within the industry. And the industry is looking at currently utilizing about 24 gigahertz to 40 gigahertz for the slice of the millimeter wave technology for 5G. It's interesting. And I think this is a great chart that can be used as a reference tool as you see different advertisements or ads or conversations about the wireless industry and 5G to try to put it in perspective where everything falls. Next slide, please. The network drivers. We've talked a lot about the evolution of the technology from macro to small cells, but all the initiatives on 5G is still about capacity, to offload the existing LTE networks that are at capacity, that are just choking, that they are not able to meet customer demand. So the wireless industry is running like the wind to try to deploy as many small cells as possible. And the small cells may have LTE technologies on them, but they're ultimately going to have 5G. Last but not least is the industry's hoping that the 5G is going to support future technologies. The problem is we don't know what those technologies are. They don't exist today. And the industry likewise is struggling with how to monetize something that's unknown. One thing that's known is that the industry is evolving at lightning speed. One great example is that just last year, the industry was talking about autonomous vehicles and the possibility of the wireless carrier networks to support autonomous vehicles, the connection of the vehicles, and drive the networks for the autonomous vehicles. Well, just in 1 year's time, there's been almost 180-degree shift within the industry, in that it appears as though that the success of the autonomous vehicles are going to be driven by 5G technologies, but it's not going to be a network that's provided by carrier. It's going to be a network that's driven from vehicle to vehicle. So each vehicle is going to have an embedded 5G device, and that device is going to talk back and forth between the vehicles to manage the operation of those vehicles. So it's interesting. The wireless industry is constantly evolving, and the one takeaway that I'd like to leave you with is that in the wireless industry, change is constant. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Jim. Jim's going to delve into the military aspects of it. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Marshall. Great job. My name is Jim Hildebrand, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Marshall was the one that brought this opportunity to me, and I'm excited definitely to be speaking to you all today. And, as they stated, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we're happy to answer those. If you want to go to the next slide, please. All right, talking about history of wireless, I'm going to read a statement. Michael Franca was a person who helped us collaborate a little bit on this presentation, and he sent an email to Marshall and I yesterday, and I just want to read the first part of it. And this is from Michael. After working as a civilian for the Army for over 40 years, most of which was in support of the bases, I would say that the poor level of personal telecommunications was one of the most frustrating and persistent issues on the bases. And that's what we're going to kind of go over today, and all the things that we're trying to do. Serving our country is absolutely amazing. The young men and women that do this on a daily basis, and we want to get this better communication out there. So that's our goal on a daily basis for my job and for my team. So with the history of wireless on bases, from what I could gather, that the first infrastructure on bases were back in the 80s. But if you go back to the beginning of wireless, you actually go back to World War II, and you think about the soldiers that carried big packs with the big radios. That was wireless communications. It was radios, and that's exactly what this is. Today's technology, for which most of you guys I'm sure have at least one device, maybe multiple devices, started in the 70s, and when they started to take these devices and kind of get them a little bit smaller. If you look back at the history of wireless, you'll see the bag phones that people had, and they were quite lunky, and the cell phones themselves were absolutely huge. But that's when it began. That's when they started really to refine this, and they went into people's cars and stuff like that. They were hardwired into their cars and everything. It was lots of craziness there. But for military bases, what I want to talk about is the aspects of it. And just to give you an example of a project that I started working, it was actually 2004, end of 2004. And to deploy that one macro tower took me 5 years, and it was very frustrating. Worked with some absolutely wonderful people on this project, and just the policies and the procedures are what really slowed things down. So the 3 Ps I threw out here: policies, procedures, and personnel. When you look at the personnel aspect, we all have jobs. We all do a lot of wonderful things out there. And the thing is adding something onto somebody's plate is not always the easiest thing to do, especially if they don't have the policies and the procedures to tell them how to do that. So a lot of times that's what kind of slowed down the gears and the grind of everything. You think about the goal of the carriers, and of course, with any business, financial, of course, you have to look at that. The carriers are in this to make money. They basically want to be able to sell devices and do great things and be able to grow their businesses, right? Marshall already hit on capacity, and that's one of the biggest grinds that you guys see out there. A lot of times when you have coverage and everybody looks at the bars on their phone, that's great. When you have 4 bars on there, hey, you have great coverage, but why do you get that circle of death, right? And that's because of the capacity in that area. There's so much congestion. There's so many people utilizing the devices that it slows things down. Think about people getting onto a bus. There's only so many seats on a bus. Kind of put that into the aspect of cellular. The carriers do care, and I will definitely tell you that they care, because both Marshall and myself have worked for all the carriers, and there's great people at the carrier level, whether they're veterans or non-veterans, that really want to support things better for the people that are serving out there. You think about the 2 aspects, and we alluded to it a little bit earlier, is mission support and quality of life. And those are the 2 things that you want to think about all the time when you're on the base, because mission always comes first. And that's absolutely, bar none, Doesn't matter if it's a post commander, if it's a wing commander, you name it. On these bases, mission is the biggest thing. Quality of life is there as well. You've got all these men and women that live, work, and play on these bases. And if the quality of life is not good, they're not going to want to live on those bases. So it becomes a problem with everything that's going on out there. The carriers in the past have always done this from the outside. And I won't say always done this. They mainly have done this from the outside. Bottom line is it's easier to get a cell tower done on the outside of the fence than it is on the inside. When they have their fiscal budgets, they look at that year. They want to get things done in that fiscal year. And with the length of time, as I explained to you earlier, 5 years getting a project done is really not efficient use of their money. So they sit there and I won't quote the carrier, but they pound from the outside. They get that signal in from the outside, and they basically try to cover the bases that way. Go ahead, next slide. Next slide, please. The obstacles, and there's plenty of them. I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to work with the level of the commanders, the telecom group, the real estate groups, from the Pentagon level. I've been able to meet with some of the assistant secretaries of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, just wonderful people. And so what my job has been over the past 5 years is trying to get these policies and procedures better, make it more efficient to do that. So we can go back into the 80s, we can go back into the 90s, we can go back into the early 2000s and look at the policy and the procedures there. And as I put on here, it had telephone in it. Well, these are not telephones. They're mobile phones. They're cellular phones. They're wireless devices. And so basically, they've had to sit there and create these policies and procedures and get them better over time. President Obama did a great thing back in 2012, and he released a policy. And basically, what he was trying to do was get broadband across the United States, get it to these rural areas, get it to these outlying areas, help the people out all over, which included the military bases. Because if you notice, where are military bases? They're usually stuck in the middle of nowhere. They're by small towns. They're out in the middle of the state and away from everything, because generally military bases, there's a little bit of noise on them, right? Whether it's guns, airplanes, ships, you name it. They try to keep them away from areas. So with his policies, he was trying to push that, and it helped. It did help. It assisted a little bit in getting some of this infrastructure on there. In 2018, another one came with the Sustainable Spectrum Strategy. And basically, again, trying to allude to get things better, get things moving on these bases. And it helped. I'm going to go into particulars with the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Marines fall under the Navy, but don't tell them that. You'll see that later. But I'm going to get into that a little bit later about what the assistant secretaries and secretaries of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force are doing to try to promote this, try to get this out there. In 2019, the report in May of the emergency technologies and their impact, basically, they took a look at all this and what could we do to make this better, to make this a little bit more efficient. And included in it was the DoD in getting this infrastructure out there. And this was for small cell, micro cells. Some of the carriers don't like the term small cell, but small cell, micro cell, little towers. How about that? That you guys, see sometimes, mainly in cities and very congested areas where they're on top of light poles. They're basically on telephone poles, street poles, in the 30-foot range, somewhere in that area. But basically, they put this out there and they said, hey, we want to be able to get this infrastructure on these bases in under 270 days. It's awesome. We were all excited about it, but still, to this day, we're still struggling to get that rock up the hill, as I always say. So I'm sure you see the need for the updates. And as we go through this, I'll kind of break down a little bit of the process, the progress we've made over that time. With the processes themselves, the wireless infrastructure on these bases is scarce. It's very sad to go onto a base and literally speaking to the young soldiers, the airmen, the Marines, and they're all sitting there on their phones. They're all sitting there utilizing these devices. And bottom line is they all complain about the services on the bases. And having these discussions with I call y'all kids, these young men and women that are serving our country, having the discussions with these kids out there and seeing the issues that they have, when they can't even call mom, they can't call dad, they can't do the things that they want to do. These devices are utilized for so much, and doggone it, they should be able to do everything, with the little money that they get paid and all that they're doing out there. So the infrastructure is scarce. We're trying to get that better on a daily basis. The processes and procedures has to be better. It has to be more concrete. It has to be fluid, so it's a lot easier to do. The Pentagon sees this. I've been fortunate enough to have great sit downs with, again, some of the assistant secretaries, and they see the issues, they see the problems, and they're trying to do things to get this better. With 5G coming as fast as it did, and I say fast, of course, this took years to get implemented and everything, but as fast as it did, and as fast as we're trying to get it through, basically, they're sitting there kind of saying, okay, what do we do with this technology? How is it going to work on our bases? What is the security risk? What are the issues? So they've got all these balls up in the air that they're juggling and trying to get this done. So with them seeing the opportunities, the leadership on the bases, seeing the opportunities and how well this stuff is going to benefit the men and women, had a great conversation with a Marine, and he said, look, he goes, if my men and women can use this in training, in battle, in anything, he goes, I want them to have everything available to them. And I was like, I wanted to hug him. I was so excited. I was like, this is absolutely awesome. This is great. This is what I want to hear. Still took me 4 years to get that infrastructure out there. So it's a battle. You come to today and think about the coronavirus and how it's affected us all. As you see, I'm working in my house right now, and most people are working in their houses. They're going to school in their houses. The infrastructure is needed even more. I don't know about your neighborhoods, but I can tell you my neighborhood, definitely, I get a little lag on my internet, so there's times when I don't have the best throughput. So with these devices, it's needed more and more and more because there's more things that are being done with these devices on a daily basis. You think about your laptops, your tablets, your cell phones. All these things are wireless, and so the infrastructure is needed there. Next slide, please. Okay, so jumping into kind of the real world examples, giving a little bit of breakdown of the DoD. We'll start with the Air Force. Air Force started in 1947. It's the Army Air Corps. That's the old symbol for the Army Air Corps, so I threw it up there. When it comes to wireless on Air Force bases, there's multiple divisions. There's multiple aspects that have to be done. AVCAC is one of the major ones. AVCAC is the Air Force Central Engineering Command Center, and they basically do the real estate aspects of it. They do the legal aspects of it. You name it for getting this wireless on there. So I had the absolute pleasure, and I get to work with these men and women all the time, and they're just great people. In 2018, two things happened. They kicked out the opportunity to lease. What this was no base left behind. That was their motto. We do not want to have large or small bases left behind. We want to make sure that there's infrastructure on every base. Doesn't matter if there's one person in the base or if there's thousands of people at that base. So that was a great thing. And I like the way they do that. It's a process. As you all know, you throw something out, it takes a little while to get that train moving. So it's going well. It's going absolutely fantastic. They kicked out 10 bases, and those 10 bases are all progressing forward. They're not all done yet. Some are already done. But that's all part of the process, right? The other thing they did is they granted the real estate instruments to the wing commanders, to the base commanders, that they're able to do this. And I know personally, I was able to do one of these, which was absolutely fantastic, at one of the Air Force bases close to myself. And we've got that infrastructure out there. That infrastructure is operating, and the men and women there are seeing the benefits of it. It was absolutely fantastic. So those two things were absolutely great, that working with AVCAC. You jump over to the Army. Two of the many agencies is IMCOM, the Installation Management Command, and also AFES, Army Air Force Exchange. And those two agencies basically kind of dictate what goes on. AFES jumped forward just last year. Yes, 2019. And basically what they did is they took control of this, and they said, look, we want to run this. We want to be promoters of this and get out there and do things. MCOM saw what they were doing. They kind of read between the lines. They're like, all right, this is a good thing. We're going to support you and see how this goes. And so basically with this, they're trying to streamline that process, that procedures to get this infrastructure out there and have it benefit these men and women faster. I can honestly tell you that I am seeing a lot of progress here. We get to work with AAFES all the time, great people, and we're making strides in the process. It's not perfect yet, but we're still, we're pushing that rock up the hill, and we're making great progress, which is great. Go ahead, the next slide, please. The Navy, okay, it's been around for a couple of years, right? And a lot of changes happened in the Navy over the time. But basically, talking about the memorandums that have come out, the Navy really hit the nail on the head. In 2016, they kicked out the streamlined process. And in this memorandum, and you guys can look this up online, and if needed, we can always send out the link to it. In this memorandum, it basically spells out everything that's going to happen in the process, what check boxes you have to go through, and the timeline. Now, it's not perfect because everybody knows a piece of paper, what has happened to it, it just gets put into somebody's desk and things kind of grind down and slow down because everybody has their jobs to do. So we're not where we need to be 100% with the Navy, but they really made a great effort to do this, and that they've continued to upgrade that memorandum 2016, 2017, 2019, and I think we're going to have another one coming out this year. We'll see. So basically what they're doing, though, is they're trying to basically get that process, those procedures in a step-by-step order so these commanders at the base level understand what to do, who's going to be doing what they're doing, and how they're held accountable. It's a work in progress, but the Navy really, they did some great stuff here. We were really excited when this memorandum came out. Again, nothing's perfect, but we're pushing. We're pushing hard. The Marines, and I absolutely love the Marines. I've got some great friends, and of course, don't tell them they fall under the Navy because they don't like that. But they're wonderful people, and so they are their own division of the DoD, but they do fall under the Navy. But MCICOM is up at the Pentagon, and so you have MCI East and MCI West. There's Marine Corps Installations East and Marine Corps Installations West. Wonderful people that are working these things, and I've had the absolute pleasure of working with both the East and the West on these things. And there's a gentleman, Brandon Newell, that is a Marine, and he's a fantastic guy, and he's been doing a lot of the test beds for 5G out there. And basically, he's working with the carriers on this, and there's a lot of great examples out there of what he's been able to do. But the Marines also, they have their nuances. Okay, they do follow Navy policies and procedures, but every Marine base is different. So again, we're still pushing. We're not quite where we need to be, but we're making progress. And with people like Brandon out there, and he's done such a fantastic job, and he's promoting what he's doing as well. It's great because these commanders are seeing this, and they're seeing the opportunities of what they can do. Go ahead, next slide, please. Okay, the non-discriminatory approach. Basically, looking at this, you want to think about two factors. You've got the DoD and their processes, their policies, their procedures. You've got the wireless and what they want to do, the wireless carriers. So every carrier is different, and the way that they deploy is different. So you think about the networks, and that's what they all call them, right? They're networks. Think about a hub and spoke. Okay, so you've got a site here, and then you have sites around the outside. Well, the way one carrier A does it is different than the way carrier B does it, is different than the way carrier C does it. So you have all these different technologies and how they're deploying these things. And it kind of, it makes it a little bit difficult. But what you're trying to do is bring this together with the DoD and have them understand, hey, look, this is the way that we're going to be able to do this. And it's a little bit of a hit and miss kind of deal. With these different objectives of the carriers, as Marshall alluded to earlier, you have coverage and you have capacity. Coverage is to cover that umbrella, that large look at an area. The capacity is to fill in below. And the capacity can be done in a lot of different ways. The small cells that we talked about, microcells, you can do in-building solutions with DAS systems, IDAS, ODAS kind of operations and stuff like that. But basically, there's so many different factors of that And with every carrier doing it differently, it makes it a little difficult for these bases. So if you think of just an Air Force base as an example, one carrier comes in and says, hey, I just want to do 2 macro towers. That'll be great for my network. Okay, the base is good with that. Next carrier comes in and says, we just have to do 5 micro cells, 5 small cells. That's good for us. Okay. Next carrier comes in and says, we want to do 30 microcells or small cells. So the bases are getting bombarded with all these questions and solutions for what these carriers need. It kind of boggles the mind and makes it a little bit difficult for these bases, and they have to sit there and they have to assess things, which the Navy does, the Army does, and the Air Force does constantly. So basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take this whole ball of wax, put it into a neat little box, and hand it to the bases and say, hey, this is how it's going to be done. Doesn't always work simply, but it's a process, and it's deployment strategies, and it's ideas. So a lot of collaboration has been happening on all sides, whether it's at the Army level, the Navy level, or the Air Force level, where they've invited, companies like mine and companies like Marshall's and the carriers to the Pentagon to have these discussions and say, hey, how can we do this? How can we make this fit right? And so they're all working on it. It just takes a little bit of time. It's getting better. It's definitely a lot better than it used to be. It's not perfect yet, but we're almost there. Next slide. Okay. Again, what I was talking about earlier, and I kind of jumped ahead a little bit with the collaborative efforts. Basically, the objectives of the bases with the objectives of the wireless industry. So simple concept, but what I broke down earlier and what I discussed earlier is the mission, and that always comes first. That's always what the commanders want to do. They want to train their soldiers, Marines, airmen, seamen. They want to train them all to do the best that they can, be the best operating person for their job, for their company, for their battalion, you name it. And that's always first. So, you have to make sure that you touch on that and you're able to support that. The quality of life, not that it's a far second, basically having those men and women that live there, that play there, that work there, and being able to do that. So if you think about it, with the young people that serve our country, a lot of them are married, they have kids, whether it's the wife or the husband, they have jobs, they might have a home business, they might be homeschooling at this time during the coronavirus. So all these factors come into play, and so that infrastructure is just needed more and more. So creating the win-win solution. So in business, it's simple, guys. And this is something I always try to do to you men and women out there, basically create that win-win. If 2 people walk away from something happy, they're likely going to come back together again and work on something together. So you try to create that win-win. You get the win for the DoD, you get the win for the carriers. So with the carriers, the biggest thing is that timeline. The biggest frustration I always had is by the time my project got done and I was able to go out there and construct on these bases, I was blowing the dust off of old radios, old equipment, old technology, putting up on the tower and literally having to turn around and revamp it right away. So you want to have that timeline in under 12 months. And that's something that we're pushing on, and everybody's listening, and it's coming better. And the last statement there, do we want 5G today or do we want it in 5 years? And that's where these bases and the DoD has to sit there and listen, and they are. And they're creating these opportunities, and it's getting better. And we have a long way to go, but getting that infrastructure out there is one of the biggest things. Next slide. Marshall, we kind of both collaborated on this one here, basically the access to 5G networks and all the things that it can do. So, when you look at broadband, that's what I'm on right now. I'm on my internet, right? So the broadband technology is being able to take that technology and transmit it to other areas. You need a big pipe for that, right? Emergency communications for first responders. If you look at the technology that's out there today for first responders, it's pretty amazing. But being able to utilize that technology is one of the things that's always tough. If the devices don't work where they are, it's worthless. So that's just one thing to think about. And, we're trying to do that better everywhere. But the foundation for future technologies, Marshall alluded to this a little bit. the DoD gets to play with some pretty cool toys. It's pretty amazing out there, the technologies that we have, and a lot of this stuff that we get to play with today started on the military bases and started in these areas where they tested these things out, worked with these things, utilized it for whatever they're using: autonomous vehicles, audiovisual, artificial intelligence, robotics, technologies of the future that just blow our minds, right? There's a lot of great things out there. So how the bases are going to benefit from this, it's tenfold. I can't just put one thing down there. The amount of things that they're already utilizing, and when I spoke about Brandon Newell and the Marine and what he's doing in testing this technology, it's happening everywhere. It's happening on Air Force bases. It's happening on Marine bases, Navy bases, Army bases. They're looking at all this stuff on a daily basis. Next slide. I'm good. I want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I haven't seen any questions. Please, feel free, jump in. Marshall?
Yeah, likewise, we greatly appreciate this opportunity, and we're available to field any questions that people may have.
Yeah, so everyone go ahead and start typing into the chat box your questions. I'll just kick it off with just a few that I have. Guys, if you could each, or one, talk about the biggest challenges you think we're going to face. If you were to narrow down to just like one or two, like what would be a takeaway of like the biggest challenges our military faces with implementing 5G?
Jim,
Marshall, you want to jump in first? Or you want me to go?
You can go, and I'll follow up.
Sure. And I think Marshall alluded to a little bit of this earlier. Fiber is the key, and getting that fiber infrastructure on bases is absolutely key. A lot of bases have a good fiber network. They already have a good build out, but getting that fiber out there is key, and it's going to take a while. In the discussions that we have on a daily basis with the bases that we're working on, getting that fiber out there, getting that there is definitely, it's tough. There's a lot of history on bases. There's a lot of infrastructure in the ground. Some of it's known, some of it's not known. So I'd say fiber is one of the biggest things that we need to do. Marshall?
I agree with you, Jim, but I think just at the basic level is education, and trying to get the different decision makers and the leadership to understand the importance of 5G, and that a private 5G network can coexist with a DoD-run 5G network, and their firewalls, their protocols that are set up, and ultimately, a private network is going to benefit the base and is not going to compromise any security or protocols that the base has. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns that are expressed to me. I mean, the same concerns are expressed to me from the departments of transportation. Very similar, that they don't want the private 5G networks to interfere with the DOT controlled networks. So just a thought.
Okay.
Very good.
I see a couple questions. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and field it, Jim, if you can see it.
Sure. Alex, what kind of investment would you estimate in terms of dollars to bring bases to full 5G? That's a huge question, and it's a huge dollar amount. Full 5G is going to take a couple years. I mean, no doubt about it. The amount of investment, you can look at all the carriers and see the billions of dollars that they're investing in getting this 5G spectrum up and running across the country. I wouldn't even know what kind of number to put on that. It's a great question. I would throw it in the billions because of everything that's needed and the time it's going to take to deploy. So that's my guess. Marshall, what do you think?
I agree. High billions. I mean, it's a significant number. And there again, it's the infrastructure for the 5G, that the 5G devices and the antennas and the equipment are relatively inexpensive. What's expensive is that fiber and bringing commercial power to the sites and developing the infrastructure that's required to support that equipment. And it's just it's a lot of work that needs to be done.
The next question I see is from Lorraine Roberts. I'm confused about what is currently in the news about the Pentagon selling the 5G spectrum to a private company and how will it affect this. So the spectrum aspect, and Marshall, I'm definitely going to lean on you a little bit because I know that we both have a lot of experience with this, but I'll just start it off. The spectrum aspect, think about it as when you come to the capacity, the wider, broader spectrum that the carriers have enables them to deploy technologies such as 5G or enhanced 4G services. Basically gives them that bandwidth. So with the private companies that are buying this and private companies that are getting into this, it's a twofold thing. They're looking at a lot of different ways right now to deploy technologies. So these sales that you see are definitely key in trying to be able to expand and have that higher capacity. Marshall?
Yeah, and I think an easy way to think about it is that the DoD and the FCC and state entities and private entities control segments of the spectrum. And what's evolved over the last couple of years is that the different companies have determined that you can take a slice of a spectrum and allocate that slice of the spectrum to be utilized by another entity. And I think that that's the confusion is that the DoD is not going to be selling all their spectrum, nor is the FCC going to be selling all their spectrum. They're just selling slices of the spectrum that can be utilized for different applications throughout our communities and on the bases. There's a spectrum that's CBRS. It's the Citizens Band Radio Spectrum. It's been around for years. It was initially the two-way radio communication technology that truckers used to communicate amongst themselves prior to the mobile-to-mobile devices that we know today. And it's a very large spectrum. And the FCC has gone in and they're slicing up that spectrum. They're reserving some of it for the military. They're reserving some of it for the DOTs. But they've opened up a lot of it for multiple uses, and you don't even have to be licensed to use it. It's a free architecture, and so it's a lot of dynamics going on in the industry, and a lot of things that you're evolving. And like I said, the technology is evolving at lightning speed. It's almost hard to keep up with it because every week you get a different announcement about somebody's new advancement.
Great, I appreciate you.
Any other questions?
I've got two. I think two can fit more in this time frame. Jim, you had a slide up that kind of showed some of the advantages of having 5G, the toys you were referring to. What would be, for both of you guys, what would be the most exciting thing you're looking forward to with the implementation of 5G?
I'll go ahead and start there. So, artificial intelligence is something that's been talked about for years. Of course, you see a lot of crazy films about that and everything. But the abilities of what we've been able to do in designing different aspects of it, I think is absolutely amazing. One of the biggest things that we talked about is for 5G is that low latency, that time. So if I sat there and I called you on my phone and you were standing in front of me, you'd see that split-second timing of me saying hello and then you hearing it. With 5G, that latency is down to nothing. You're able to do things in real time. I believe one of the carriers has a video out where they show a race car driving around a racetrack, and then they black out the windows, and the gentleman puts on his VR goggles, and he can see through the camera that's on the hood of the car the track, and basically he's driving around the track with the VR goggles, basically being able to see through that camera, and that's going from the camera back to the switch with the company, and then back to the car like that. It's pretty amazing. So those are some things that I see, is that the training abilities on these bases and what the men and women will be able to utilize and what's out there for them, that's going to make them a better soldier, a better Marine, a better airman, you name it. Marshall?
I'm excited that 5G has the potential to transform the engineering industry. And specifically, it's how data that's collected in the field is transferred back to a remote engineering office for real-time engineering. I just see that there's going to be efficiencies created and great opportunities for us to better understand the data that's being collected and processed, and prevent that return trips to sites because the survey crews miss something, or it is just has great potential. And there's been some tests or talk about reality mesh and how that the data that's being collected through digital imagery can be transported back and processed in almost real time at environment. And that, to me, that's really exciting to have that capability, so that clients, we can, as in an engineering industry, we can provide our clients almost instant gratification for the modeling of 3D and such. But that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and actually, you brought up a great point and made me think of something with one of the Air Force bases I was working with. And basically, with the aircraft today, they go out there with these tablets and they're downloading code, they're uploading code, they're figuring out how the aircraft performed and everything. And we had to get out there and get some better infrastructure on that base for them to be able to do this. Having what Marshall's talking about is that ready time. Basically, an aircraft, a tank, a battleship, you name it, whatever, it comes in basically, and being able to turn that around as quickly as possible and get it back into whatever aspect it's working on, whether it's an aircraft and going back into flight to complete its mission. That turnaround time and having the ability to download that information that fast. You look at the aircraft, whether it was created back in the 70s that we're still flying today, to the new aircraft that we have with the multi-use types. It's amazing that the lines of code and everything that they do and the abilities and how they can tweak just the littlest things and get that plane right back up. It's amazing.
I appreciate that. I think, 5G is pretty exciting to see how it's going to be changing our world. The last thing I've got is just, if you would play the crystal ball game and just forecast, your conversations with the Pentagon and the various stakeholders of the DoD, what do you think the next 12 months looks like? I mean, 12 to 18 months. I mean, do you see them making a big push to implement this? Do you see them, having a mandate for any of this? I guess what are you hearing, and what would be your crystal ball forecast?
They are definitely looking at this. They're looking at this very hard, and you're seeing a lot of the aspects where they're getting out there and testing this type of technology. For the next 12 months, I see a lot of changes. I think the changes are going to come all around, to be honest with you. The coronavirus has changed our world, everything that we're doing, everything that we're able to do. For my job, the in-face meetings are this type of meeting, where it's a video chat. So our world is changing so fast, and with all the stipulations that we had in the past with this type of technology, they've got to look at it. They've got to take the time and analyze it and say, okay, look, we can't sit there and say we'll put this off till tomorrow when the infrastructure is needed today. We have to have better communications, and it's got to be better on these bases as fast as possible. You hear it in, and I'm never going to talk politics because it just drives me crazy, but you hear it in what President Trump talks about all the time. We're behind China with what they're doing, and that's something that's not acceptable to all the men and women in our country. We want to have this infrastructure today. So the talks, the pushes, it's happening. In the next 12 months, I think we're going to see some pretty amazing things. getting the technology out there is still going to take time. There's still the policies and the procedures that they're working on, and it takes time to do all this stuff. But it's going to be pretty fast and furious. You see the carriers changing their philosophies, and that's happening on a daily basis. I believe one of the carriers just kicked out a statement that they're going from millimeter wave down to that lower spectrum, and trying to kick out a better CONUS 5G effort. But everybody's doing it, and so I think the next 12 months will be pretty exciting.
I agree with Jim. We're in a worldwide race for the deployment of 5G, and whoever has the ubiquitous 5G networks are going to facilitate the success of the new technologies. They go hand in hand. You can't have the new technologies without the 5G network. So I see that there's going to be a greater sense of urgency throughout the leadership of this country and within the DoD.
All right. Well, it's perfect timing. Kind of brings us to the top of the hour. I agree. This next 12 months is going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out. And I'm all at the end of the day excited for it. So guys, Jim and Marshall, I appreciate your time. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to present to the SAME young professionals. And we look forward. We'll be posting this internally. Eddie he's recorded this, and we'll send a link out to anybody who wants to come back and watch it. If you got any questions, the contact information is right here, and please feel free to reach out. So with that, signing off. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone. Y'all take care.
You're saying.
Thank you too.